Hey guys, Martin here. Another We're Still Here for the week of the 25th, I believe, the 24th. And I just wanted to say it's been a mixed bag of a week. Some ups and downs. It's not been straight sailing either way. There's been good parts and there's been bad parts. And the good parts haven't been super great, but the bad parts haven't been super bad. And it's been okay. Like, I can definitively say that the past week was all right. I got a lot of work done, and I got to see a lot of my friends, which is I don't know about you, but on occasion that's very helpful for me. If I'm at like a big party with a huge crowd of people, I struggle a great deal. I kind of have to go off to myself, or even just be like, I can't be in here with you guys. I have to go and leave. But you know, when I just have like a small group of like 5 or 6 people, I'm okay. And we had a couple of times where we're going to hang out as just a small, intimate group, and that was really, really good. And I got a lot of work done. I got the script for episode 70 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged done, and I'm happy with it, I think. You never know until it's done. But it's done. I mean, the script is done, and the episode is going to be put together based on that, and I'm very... I'm looking forward to that being done and getting that out of the way, and I'm also just happy that I was able to. I'm happy that I was able to get through the last 7 days or so, however long it's been, and just function. You know, functioning is a success. But there was something I wanted to talk about this week, and it was Marble Hornets, the horror-based web series. If you've been watching We're Still Here since the beginning, you've probably noticed that some of the entries for this series tend to be more personal than others. Not everybody, I'm sure, can identify with my struggles with going to conventions and doing videos and stuff, because not everybody does that. It's not something everybody does. It's not something that everybody deals with, you know, especially people with depression. You know, not everybody is... I feel like a lot of creative people do deal with it, but not everybody is in the exact same position that I'm in. So some of these videos come across as probably kind of polarizing, because you might not know where I'm coming from with them. But I feel like this one, even though on the outside I'm talking about Marble Hornets, the horror series about Slender Man killing a bunch of people and stalking them and psychologically traumatizing them, while that may not be for everybody, especially if you're dealing with something, if you're in a bad place, like depression or anxiety, that probably wouldn't necessarily be helped by watching this show. And I wouldn't recommend it outright, just because, you know, it's very extreme. But I feel like what I have to say about it in this entry is relevant for hopefully all of us, because it's what I take away from it more than what the show actually is, and, you know, why I enjoy it. If you haven't seen Marble Hornets, it's a series about a group of... They start off as students, and eventually you realize it's a larger narrative about, you know, where they go from having been students to being these young men, basically trying to figure out this mystery. I don't want to say too much about, you know, the plot itself, because a lot of the fun in watching is from learning very small pieces of information about what's going on in between these characters and what's happened to them in the past, and that's half the fun, and I don't want to ruin that for you. But it's at its core, it's a show about these 3 guys who are being stalked by Slender Man in various forms, and they have to deal with that. And the one in particular that, you know, sort of the fandom latched onto is Tim, played by Tim Sutton, who is the masked, possibly, I don't want to give too much away, possibly accomplice of Slender Man. Who knows? Watch the show. I highly recommend it. But Tim, as it transpires, and I will be going into spoiler territory, because I'm going to be talking about the very ending of the show and how it affected me. Tim, it turns out, has been dealing with a lot of the stuff that these other characters are dealing with his whole life. It's been something that has scarred him. He has had to basically be on medication his entire life. His whole young adult life has been ruined by the fact that he can't hold down a steady job. He can't function as a real person, because Slenderman's after him, basically. You know, that's the gist of it. You slowly come to learn more about this character, especially in season 3. I should mention that I just rewatched the show. I marathoned the whole thing with a bunch of my friends like a week ago, and we watched it. We sat from like 2 p.m. in the afternoon to 2 a.m. in the morning. We just marathoned. I didn't realize it was going to be as long as it was, because obviously every entry is sort of segmented, and it's some of them are 2 minutes, some of them are 20 minutes. But it was a long, thrilling experience, and it helped me to look at the experience as a whole and the characters, you know, from point A to point B to point C, their arcs, as it were. And Tim really stood out this time. I mean, he stands out every time, but he stood out this time because of what I'm going through. And I'm not trying to suggest that what I'm going through is even remotely as awful as what Tim goes through in the show. I mean, I'm not being, you know, potentially possessed by, you know, a scary, faceless demon being. But I am sometimes unable to account for things that I've done. I'm like not literally, I don't wake up being like, where was I? But sometimes I'm like, why did I do that? And sometimes I'm like, that wasn't me. That was my feelings. That was my, you know, anxiety. That was something that I, you know, just had. And obviously medication is a big thing. You know, if you don't stick to your medication, your world changes around you. And that's something that very literally happens to Tim throughout the show. And the reason I wanted to talk about Marble Hornets as a whole for this video is because it presents a potential suicide situation. And this is very specifically about the ending. It presents a character who another character has told him, basically, the only way for this to end is to end your own life. That's literally like words that the character of Joe says to Tim, like in some of the penultimate dialogue of the entire series. He's like, the only way for this to end is if you kill yourself. And I remember, I mean, there were multiple times during the series where I would not have been surprised if Tim's character would have killed himself. And when you watch the final video, and I do want to preface this by saying not only am I going to be talking specifically about spoilers here, I'm talking about, you know, suicide, which, you know, obviously is a very touchy subject, not just for you, but for me. Tim is literally shown as traveling down a road, and this is the final thing you see in the series. He's traveling down a road, and then he comes to crossroads, a literal crossing of the road where he has to choose to go left or go right. And visually it's very simple, but what it represents is very powerful because, and I really want to thank the people who made Marble Hornets, who I know personally, but I don't talk to them very often just because I don't talk to anybody very often, and I feel like this would be a weird thing to just sort of broach out of nowhere after years, you know. But I do want to say thank you to them because of the way they presented this, because Tim is presented as being in a really bad way. Like, to not mince words, he's at the end of his rope. He's completely unkempt. He's not shaved in a while, and you see him. He's a different person, and he could very easily be choosing to kill himself at the end. We don't know for certain because it's open-ended. And I was kind of surprised by going on forums and, you know, checking out what people had to say about the final episode, because so many people were convinced that he killed himself. And my wife, after we watched it again this past week, was like, yeah, he killed himself. That was his goal. And I was sitting there and I said to myself, you know, like, but I didn't see it that way. I saw it as somebody who had made the choice despite everything that was bad in his life. And he's got a bad lot, let's face it. He's been dealt a bad hand. Worse than most in that universe. But from my perspective, and the show did nothing different for me, obviously. The show presented everything in the same light that it was shown to everybody else. I thought this was the show's way of saying there is still hope and that Tim is going to be okay, and that he may not be okay, but he's going to choose to live. Because, you know, there are certain things he's doing in that video where you could interpret it as him tying up loose ends before he kills himself, or you could interpret it as being, this is something, you know, he had to do to make sure things were right, and he had to stay alive to be sure that this happened. I don't know how you perceived it if you watched the show, but those final moments of the series, the fact that they were presented in an open-ended way, even if the people who made the show, the great talented people who made the show, if they had a certain interpretation of it, I don't know one way or another. I don't want to know one way or another. But the fact that they made the conscious choice artistically to say Tim is at a crossroads and he can choose one way or another, that's important for me. You know, that's important for somebody who is stood at that same crossroads and doesn't know which way to go, and doesn't necessarily feel like there are two options. You know, I feel sometimes like there is only one option. And very smartly throughout the series, they punctuate certain season breaks. In fact, the very first thing you see in Marble Hornets is a car traveling down a straight road. There are multiple occasions where it's just a car going in one direction with no turn-offs whatsoever. And that is from the perspective of a character that does die. He doesn't kill himself, he does die. Again, spoilers, sorry. But he dies, and it's suggested by those shots, in my opinion, that he was, by making the choice to investigate Slenderman and to stir up all this stuff that, you know, may well should have been left alone. He had made the decision to die, knowingly or unknowingly, and he was always going to go down that road because of that. But when they show Tim at the end, he comes to the decision, you know, you can go left or right from here. This isn't the end. This is just a choice. And yeah, you can look at that and say, yeah, he's going to kill himself. That's the only way for this to logically stop. But you can also look at it just as part of the character's story. You can look at it and say, he doesn't have to die. And for me, for somebody who is looking at that and need, like, it would have been very easy for them to just show him dying, dead, you know, or preparing to kill himself. It would have been very easy to show that and have that be the dark, edgy ending. But they made the decision to show hope, even if it's not necessarily there for everybody. They might not see it if they don't want to see it, but I needed to see it. I needed to see hope for that character and for me, and that's what I got out of that. So, yeah, 12 hours of watching those videos, and it was a great time. I had a lot of fun with my friends, but that's the main thing I took from it, is that there are people in this world who are consciously wanting to give you hope, and through media, it's not all doom and gloom. You know, even in this show about a very terrifying entity chasing people through the woods, ended on, in my opinion, a very important and positive note. You know, wherever the story goes from there, that was the ending, and that moment meant the world to me, because it really opened my mind and my heart up to. Because the fact that I was inclined to say he doesn't kill himself meant that I'm inclined to look at myself and say he won't kill himself. I won't kill myself. So that's rough. That's rough for me to explain, and I don't think I've done a very good job of explaining it, but I guess what I'm saying is thank you, Marble Hornets, for giving me that.